Something was released into the Jamaican wilderness that was specifically designed to be a perfect eliminate machine. It was fast, it was fearless, and it had a reputation for taking down some of the deadliest snakes on the planet. But what happened next shocked the world and became the most spectacular failure in the history of nature management. These creatures did not just fail their mission, they reorganized the entire food chain of the island. And get this, the secret to their survival was a devastating habit that farmers and scientists completely failed to see coming. Poisoning paradise. Jamaica in the 1800s was basically one giant factory for sugar. The entire economy lived and died by the price of a pound of sugar in London. Britain was making a massive fortune, and plantation owners were some of the wealthiest men in the world. But there was a massive problem underneath the green leaves of the cane fields. Rats were everywhere. These were not the small mice found in a city basement. These were aggressive cane rats that could grow quite large and had a taste for the sweet stalks of the sugar plants. Every year, these rodents would eat 20 to 30% of the entire crop. That means millions of pounds in today's money were just vanishing into the stomachs of pests.
A breeding pair in 12 months would have around about 460 offspring. So if you add them all up, that's a lot of rats in the field over a year.
The people in charge tried everything to stop the bleeding. They used expensive poisons, but the rats bred faster than they could be stopped. They tried building traps, but the fields were too big to cover. They even tried importing cats, but the rats were so numerous and aggressive that the cats eventually gave up and started hunting easier things like lizards. By 1872, a Scottish planter named William Bancroft Espet thought he had found the perfect answer. He had heard stories from India about the small Indian mongoose. These animals were famous for being able to take down cobras. They were fast, brave, and extremely efficient at clearing out pests. Espet decided to import 9 of these animals from Kolkata. There were 4 males and 5 females. It sounds like such a small number, but those 9 creatures were the spark for an ecological explosion. When the crates were opened and the mongooses were released into the sugarcane fields, everyone was optimistic. For a short time, it even seemed to work. People saw fewer rats during the day and assumed the problem was being solved. But there was a fundamental detail that everyone missed, and it was a mistake that would cost the island its most precious wildlife. The hunters and the hunted were never meant to meet in the way the humans expected. Basically, the sugar fields were a war zone, and the new recruits were about to go rogue. The plantation owners stood by the fields, watching the 9 small animals vanish into the tall green grass. They imagined a future where the sugar harvest was doubled and the rats were a memory. It seemed like a simple, logical solution to a complex problem. But here is the catch. Nature does not follow human logic, and the mongoose was far more adaptable than anyone had predicted. Within months, reports began to filter back from the fields that were both encouraging and deeply confusing. The mongooses were seen eating, but they were not just eating rats. Farmers noticed that the usual morning sounds of birds were starting to fade. They saw the mongooses scurrying through the brush during the brightest parts of the day, while the rats remained safely tucked away in their cool, dark burrows. It was the first sign that the entire plan was built on a foundation of ignorance. The plantation owners had ignored the basic biology of the animals they had imported. They had brought a daytime hunter to solve a nighttime problem, and that mismatch was about to trigger a chain reaction that no one could stop. Something strange was happening in the shadows of the sugarcane. Sun versus moon. Here is the key detail that nobody bothered to check before those 9 animals were released. Mongooses are diurnal. That is a fancy way of saying they are active during the day. They wake up with the sun, hunt while it is bright, and go to sleep when it gets dark. Rats, especially the clever cane rats of Jamaica, are nocturnal. They spend their days hiding deep in burrows or under the thick cover of the fields to stay cool. They only come out to eat and reproduce once the sun goes down. Do you see the deal? The 2 animals were on completely different schedules. They were like 2 ships passing in the night, except one was asleep while the other was working. Because the mongooses were active during the day and could not find many rats, they got hungry. They were in a brand new land with no natural enemies. In India, they had to worry about leopards, tigers, and large birds of prey. In Jamaica, There was nothing that could challenge them. They had hit the biological jackpot. They had a perfect climate, plenty of space, and no one to stop them. So, instead of waiting for the rats to wake up, the mongooses started looking for other things to eat during the day. They found ground-nesting birds that had never seen a predator like this before. They found rare lizards sunning themselves on rocks. They found bird eggs just sitting in nests on the ground. And get this, the mongooses are not picky eaters. They are opportunistic predators. If an easy meal is sitting in front of them, they will take it. Why spend hours chasing a fast, aggressive rat that might fight back when you can just walk up to a bird nest and eat 4 eggs in 5 minutes? The mongooses began to ignore the sugarcane fields and move into the forests and toward the coast. They found sea turtle nests on the beaches and realized they were basically protein buffets. They would dig up a nest and consume 100 eggs without breaking a sweat. The population began to grow at an incredible rate. Those original 9 animals turned into hundreds, then thousands, and eventually millions. Within 10 years, the mongoose was no longer just a resident of the sugar fields. They had spread across the entire island, covering hundreds of square miles, thousands of square kilometers. They were everywhere, from the mountain peaks to the seaside villages. And because there was nothing to stop them, they just kept breeding. A single female could have multiple litters in a year, and each litter could have several pups. The math was devastating for the native wildlife. The plantation owners realized that while the mongooses were busy eating everything else, the rats were still destroying the sugar. In fact, in some areas, the rat problem seemed to be getting worse. This was because the mongooses were also destroying the native snakes that used to eat the rats. By eliminating the competition, the mongooses had accidentally made life easier for the very pests they were supposed to eliminate. It was a complete failure of biological control that was starting to look like a permanent disaster. The local birds were the first to stop singing forever. Vanishing bird nests. The ecological impact of the mongoose in Jamaica is a textbook case of what scientists call a trophic cascade. When you drop a new predator into a system where the animals have no defenses, things fall apart fast. The first victims were the birds. Jamaica had several species of ground-nesting birds that had evolved for thousands of years without needing to worry about fast mammals. The mongooses found these nests easily. Within a few decades, bird populations crashed by 80 or 90%. Some species, like the Jamaican petrel, were pushed toward total disappearance. It was not just the adults being taken out, it was the next generation being eaten before they could even hatch. But it did not stop with the birds. The mongooses moved toward the beaches. Sea turtles come to the Jamaican shores to lay their eggs in the sand. For the mongoose, a sea turtle nest is like a treasure chest full of protein. They would dig up the nests and eat every single egg. This meant that for years, almost no baby turtles were making it to the ocean. Then, there were the reptiles. Jamaica had several unique species of snakes and lizards. The title of this story mentioned that they were meant to eliminate snakes, and they did exactly that. They were so good at it that they nearly wiped out the Jamaican yellow snake and several other harmless species. What most people do not realize is that those native snakes were actually the ones helping the farmers. They ate rats naturally. By eliminating the snakes, the mongooses actually removed the only thing that was keeping the rat population in check at night. The result was a total mess. The birds were gone, the lizards were vanishing, and the snakes were nearly extinct. But the rats were doing just fine. In some areas, the rat population actually increased because their natural snake enemies were gone. Jamaica had paid to have its natural pest control system destroyed and replaced with a furry invader that caused more damage than the original problem. See, when a mongoose enters a forest, it acts like a vacuum. It clears out the frogs, the lizards, the insects, and the birds. This creates a massive hole in the ecosystem. The insects that the birds and lizards used to eat began to explode in numbers. Some of these insects were pests that carried diseases. Suddenly, the island was facing new problems that no one had anticipated. Mosquito populations increased, and diseases like dengue fever began to show up more frequently. It was not just a wildlife problem anymore. It was a public health crisis that could be traced back to 9 animals in 1872. The mongoose had essentially rewritten the rules of the island. It was no longer a balanced tropical paradise. It was a playground for an invasive species that had no off-switch. Farmers who used to worry about rats now had to worry about mongooses taking out their chickens. The animals discovered that chicken coops were just another easy source of food. They would sneak in during the day and take out young chicks and eggs, leaving the farmers with nothing. The mongoose had become a worse pest than the rats ever were, and there was no easy way to get rid of them. A dark secret was hiding beneath the forest floor. Failed bounty programs.
Rats have reportedly taken over a section of the city. Business operators say their efforts to control them have been futile, and so they're calling on the authorities to intervene.
By the turn of the 20th century, the colonial administration in Jamaica confronted a stark reality. The biological intervention they had initiated decades prior had devolved into an ecological and fiscal catastrophe. The sugar industry, which the small Indian mongoose was intended to protect by eradicating rats, remained plagued by the very rodents it was supposed to eliminate. Simultaneously, the island's indigenous biodiversity was undergoing a silent collapse. Ground-nesting birds, rare lizards, and terrestrial invertebrates were being decimated by a predator they were never evolved to evade. The government realized that the 9 original animals imported in 1872 had sparked a population explosion that was now entirely beyond human control. To address this, the authorities implemented a bounty system, a classic reactive strategy for pest management. The mechanism was straightforward. Citizens were paid a fixed sum, typically a few pence, for every mongoose tail delivered to local magistrates. This created a temporary cottage industry. Thousands of rural Jamaicans entered the bush, trapping and killing the animals in staggering numbers. Records from the period indicate that the government was processing tens of thousands of tails annually, an effort that initially suggested progress. However, the metric of success was fundamentally flawed. While the number of kills was high, it represented only a fraction of a population that had already reached its carrying capacity across the island's varied terrain. The primary obstacle was the mongoose's reproductive strategy. A single female can produce multiple litters a year, each consisting of several pups. This high fecundity meant that removing 50,000 individuals annually did not even dent the baseline population. It merely cleared space for the next generation to thrive with less competition for resources. The bounty program effectively became a government-funded subsidy for a species that bred faster than it could be hunted. By the time the colonial treasury realized the futility of the expenditure, thousands of pounds had been exhausted with no measurable reduction in the mongoose's presence in the cane fields. The effort was a battle against biological arithmetic, and the government was losing. Desperation led to more aggressive, albeit less targeted, methods. Chemical control via poison baits was attempted, but the mongoose's high intelligence and opportunistic feeding habits made it a difficult target. These animals quickly developed bait shyness, learning to associate specific smells or locations with the death of their kin. Consequently, the toxins often bypassed the intended targets and instead poisoned domestic pets, livestock, and surviving native scavengers. When organized hunting parties with dogs were deployed, they met similar failure. The mongoose's physical agility and ability to retreat into subterranean burrows or narrow rock crevices rendered even the most skilled hunting dogs ineffective. The terrain of Jamaica, marked by dense tropical vegetation and complex limestone formations, provided the perfect fortress for an invasive predator. By the middle of the century, the official stance shifted from eradication to a weary, resigned acceptance. The mongoose was no longer a pest to be removed, but a permanent feature of the Jamaican landscape. This realization was particularly bitter because it highlighted the permanence of human error. The decision to release those first 9 animals had taken a single afternoon, yet the consequences were now eternal. Despite this well-documented failure, the pattern of ecological ignorance repeated elsewhere. In 1883, Hawaii ignored the Jamaican precedent and imported the mongoose to its own sugar plantations. Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic followed shortly after. In every instance, the outcome was identical. The rats survived by climbing trees or remaining nocturnal, while the mongooses targeted easier, diurnal prey. In Hawaii, this pushed the nini, the state bird, to the edge of disappearance, resulting in billions of dollars in environmental damage and lost biodiversity. In contemporary ecology, Jamaica serves as the definitive case study in the unintended consequences of biological control. Scientists cite it as the primary example of why predators cannot simply be moved between continents with the expectation that they will behave as desired. We now recognize that predatory behavior is context-dependent. A mongoose in its native habitat behaves differently than one in a closed island system. Even with modern satellite tracking and advanced genetic monitoring, the species remains one step ahead of mitigation efforts. They have adapted to human encroachment, scavenging in busy city streets and thriving in the wake of agricultural expansion. They are the ultimate survivors, and their presence remains a permanent monument to the dangers of poorly researched ecological intervention. Some people believe the animals were changed by the island itself. Shadow of the mongoose. As the years passed and the mongoose population became a permanent fixture of Jamaica, rumors began to spread that were far more terrifying than simple biology. There are still many rumors in the air, but what many can confirm is that the mongooses in the deep interiors of the island do not look like the ones in the city. Some locals claim they have seen mongooses that are much larger than the typical 10 to 20 inches. These giant versions are said to hunt in packs, exhibiting a level of coordination that scientists say is impossible for the species. See, it is not just about their size, but their behavior that has changed over time. People living near the dense tropical forests report that these creatures no longer flee when they see humans. Instead, they stand their ground, watching with an intelligence that feels almost predatory and calculated. Some hunters even swear that the mongooses have developed a way to lure domestic animals into the brush by mimicking the sounds of distressed chicks or small birds. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but when you look at how quickly they adapted to the island, it is not that simple though. There is a wild theory that the British Empire was not just trying to save the sugar industry back in 1872. Some believe the 1872 importation was a cover for a secret military experiment involving early biological warfare concepts. The idea was to see if these predators could be trained to clear out human enemies in the dense tropical brush, or at least act as a mobile surveillance and disruption force. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that the mongooses seem to spread far faster than natural reproduction should allow for a group of only 9 animals. They suggest that hundreds more were released in secret locations across the island to test their ability to dominate a territory and displace native populations. While there is no official record of this in the public archives, the speed at which they took over every square inch of the island remains a mystery to many researchers. And get this, the crazy part is that some of the original crates found in old plantation ruins were marked with symbols that had nothing to do with the agricultural department, fueling the fire of this conspiracy for generations. Another even wilder theory involves the spiritual history of the island and the dark energy associated with colonial expansion. Some practitioners of Obeah, a traditional spiritual system in Jamaica, believe the mongooses were cursed from the moment they touched the soil because they were brought to protect a system built on suffering. They say the animals absorbed the restless spirits of the land and became something more than just mammals, essentially becoming living vessels for the island's resentment. According to this lore, the mongooses are not just eating birds or eggs, they are gathering energy from the life force of the island, and their presence is a permanent sign of a broken spiritual balance. This is why they are so hard to catch, and why every attempt by the government to eliminate them has failed miserably. It is as if the island itself wants them there as a reminder of the mistakes made by those in power. Basically, they have become the physical manifestation of a debt that can never be paid back, patrolling the forests as silent guardians of a forgotten history. The crazy part is that some researchers have noticed strange genetic markers in the Caribbean mongoose that are not present in their Indian cousins. This has led to the hybrid theory, which suggests the mongooses may have bred with a now extinct species of island predator that lived in the limestone caves long before humans arrived. If true, it would mean the animal running around Jamaica today is a unique, mutated version of the original hunter. It would explain their incredible adaptability and why they seem to thrive in environments like the salty marshes or high mountain peaks that should be hostile to them. Some even speculate that this mutation was not natural at all, but the result of the mongooses consuming local plants that contain high levels of specific alkaloids. These chemicals might have altered their brain chemistry, making them more aggressive and far more intelligent than the mongooses found in Kolkata. What most people do not realize is that the Jamaican mongoose is technically its own distinct branch of the species now, evolving at a rate that defies standard biological timelines. But here is the catch. There are even darker stories circulating in the rural parts of the island about underground colonies. Some explorers have reported finding complex tunnel systems that go deep beneath the surface, far more intricate than a standard burrow. They claim these tunnels are lined with the bones of their prey and show signs of organized storage, suggesting the mongooses are planning for long-term survival. There are still many rumors in the air that these tunnels might even connect to the old basement systems of abandoned plantation houses, allowing the animals to move across the island unseen by human eyes. If they are developing a subterranean society, we are only seeing a tiny fraction of their actual numbers on the surface. It's not that simple, though, because some people believe these tunnels are where the alpha mongooses live, creatures that have grown to the size of medium dogs and never see the light of day. Finally, there is the most disturbing theory of all, the truce theory. Some observers have claimed to see rats and mongooses living in the same burrows, sharing space during the day and night. The theory suggests that instead of fighting, the two invasive species have formed a symbiotic relationship to dominate the island together. They have realized that the humans are their only true enemy, and by dividing the day and night between them, they can both thrive without ever competing for the same resources. If this is true, it means Jamaica is not just facing an invasive species, but a coordinated biological occupation. Imagine an army of millions of rats and millions of mongooses working together to dismantle the island's food chain from both ends of the clock. It sounds impossible, but in a world where we have already seen nature do the unexpected, we cannot rule it out. So, here is the deal. We might be looking at the first stages of a new kind of ecosystem. One where the invaders have stopped fighting each other and started focusing on total dominance. And get this. Some suggest that the mongooses are actually being used by the rats to scout out locations during the day. The mongooses find the food sources, and the rats move in at night to finish the job. This would explain why the rat problem never actually went away despite the presence of so many hunters. The crazy part is that we might be witnessing a form of cross-species communication that we do not even have the tools to measure yet. Are we missing a key detail about how these animals communicate through scent or high-frequency sounds? The thing is, I think we have underestimated the mongoose from the very first day those 9 animals stepped off the ship. They are not just pests, they are a masterclass in survival, and perhaps something much more organized than we want to admit. There are even whispers that the mongooses have begun to mimic human behavior in subtle ways. Some farmers have reported seeing them watching how gates are unlatched or how traps are set, only to find the traps triggered and emptied the next morning without a single mongoose being caught. And that's putting it lightly, for starters, because if they are learning from us, the battle for the island is already over. We are basically living in their world now, and they are just allowing us to stay as long as we keep providing them with easy targets. Hands down, the mongoose introduction is the biggest WTF moment in Caribbean history, and the more we learn, the more it feels like we are the ones being studied. Are they waiting for the right moment to expand beyond the islands? Only time will tell. But for now, the shadow of the mongoose looms large over every corner of Jamaica. Could these animals be working together to control the entire island? What is your favorite wild theory about the mongoose disaster? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more.